walking into a gas station somewhere in Pennsylvania as a high school student. I went up to the cashier and I asked her, as most of us do, "Where is the bathroom?" She stared at me and she told me she had no idea what I was saying when I talked. I repeated the same question a couple times more, and both times she said, "I can't understand you." And I walked away, finally searching out the sign pointing to the restrooms. I'm fairly certain I was on a trip with kids from all over Kentucky, courtesy of winning an essay contest through the rural electric cooperatives in our counties. I don't know if any of the other kids had the same experience. If that was the trip that I'm thinking of, that was the same where the other high school students were shocked that I was wearing shoes because of where I was from. The middle of nowhere Kentucky is not equal, even if it is all rural. And Appalachia is fair game for everyone else to look down on. There's a reason Kentuckians tell jokes about West Virginians, since West Virginia is surely more backwater than Kentucky. After all, it was West Virginia where the toothbrush was invented, because anywhere else it would have been called a teeth brush. There is no other state that has had its state capital burned all the way down to the axles. So maybe I feel some camaraderie with Peter when he is betrayed by his hick Galilean accent. The Galileans in that area were all followers of Jesus. Their accents and whatever else was seen as Galilean made it apparent that they were there because Jesus was, and that they most likely knew him. Just an accent, pronounced or not, was enough to make their identity known. Being a Christian in a predominantly Christian society means I've never been very aware of what actions or appearances would make my faith apparent to someone else. I'm guessing the same is true for most of us. Maybe with only a season in our lives when others would realize we're Christian by some telltale sign because we're one of so few. We can pretty readily name the signs of minority faiths: a Sikh's turban or a Muslim's hijab or a Jew's kippah, but our own are not so visible. Still, I wonder if Peter worked to hide his accent when he cried out, "Woman, I don't know him." I wonder if he hid some feature of his clothing when he said, "Man, I'm not," trying to hide who he really was. It would make sense, given Peter's fear, that he would deny Jesus in both action and word. It would make sense to remove the things that would give away who he was. It was an act of self-preservation. And it's easy to be hard on Peter in retrospect when we know these days and hours of terror following Jesus' arrest are not the end. In those moments, it's easy to understand why fear won out. This scene comes after Jesus has been arrested with swords and clubs. Everything is coming undone, and what will be is unclear. It is in the uncertainty of what we call Holy Week that Peter denies knowing Jesus. It is in those moments that fear wins. And never letting the fear win is still one of our deepest calls as Christians. I hope you've been reading the Gospel according to Luke along with me this season. If you have, you might have noticed that we hear 7 different times in this Gospel, "Do not be afraid." We hear it 3 times from an angel and 4 times from Jesus. And if we'd read Matthew, we would have been told, "Don't be afraid," even more times. It's one of the most often repeated phrases in the entire Bible. And in fact, when Jesus or an angel or some other divine being shows up, there's most always a call to not be afraid. The invitation to the new thing that God is doing comes with the command, "Do not be afraid," and the converse is almost always true. The people acting contrary to the reign of God act out of fear. Luke tells us even that Jesus was killed because of the fear of the religious leaders. In the past months, you have probably heard "be afraid" many times. You've heard it from mailers and billboards and ads with all sorts of various lies and truths printed on them. Maybe you've watched your income dwindle, whether from layoffs and pay cuts by companies trying to stay afloat, or the retirement savings that isn't as abundant as it was just a few months ago. You've now spent months wearing a mask when you leave your home and washing your hands like it's your job. It's a Peter in the courtyard season, when there is real danger and uncertainty and worry. And still I say, remember the gospel you were called to. Do not let fear determine your actions. You see, we are resurrection people, after all. Today's call to worship was pulled from the Easter season earlier this year. That might seem like a long time ago at this point. At other churches, when I did children's sermons regularly, I taught them the same echo from this call to worship. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. We learned it as the special way Christians say hello to each other during Easter. And I wonder if in another place it would be one of those markers that distinguished Christians from others, like Assalamu alaikum is for Muslims. I pulled this call to worship today because it is the end that Peter doesn't know. He doesn't know there is resurrection. He doesn't know this isn't the end. He doesn't know that fear is going to melt away in just a few days. But we do. We spend several weeks each year greeting each other, Christ is risen, but it is always true. We use the present verb is for a reason. Christ is always risen. It is not just that Christ arose once, but that we live in an ongoing experience of resurrection. Christ is risen. There is never a moment when that is not true. So hold on to that gospel. Hold on to that faith that sustains you. Hold on to the gospel that proclaims, do not be afraid. And hold on especially tight when you are being told to be afraid of your neighbor. Hold on to that gospel, especially this voting season. You are not cowering in a courtyard wondering what comes next. You are fearless Easter people who know that the worst thing is never the last thing. For Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed.